Thanks, Darren. I'm really honored to be here today to talk to you about a topic that I'm quite passionate about. And just a quick show of hands, who's heard of leaky gut syndrome? All right, that's great. So this is not a new topic to you guys, which is fantastic, but guess what? It's quite a new topic to even a lot of doctors today, and a lot of practicing therapists that are dealing with nutritional elements. So I really want to tackle this because I'm not trying to be too melodramatic with the title, but leaky gut is actually behind a lot, if not all, chronic disease today. There's some connection that we can trace to the intestine with almost all chronic ailments today. So I really want to start to give you guys some information that you can use, start to understand if perhaps this is something that's already going on with you, and how to fix it. So just a quick bit of information about who I am. I'm a naturopathic doctor here in Toronto, and I've been practicing for 8 years, and I created the Dempster Clinic, the Center for Integrative Medicine. And my passion in doing this is really to bring together a number of different facets of medicine under one roof, where we can really aim to treat the root of the cause with all of our patients' health concerns. That's what really drove me into naturopathic medicine, is to establish the why, and not just put Band-Aid solutions on things, even though it may be a natural Band-Aid. To me, that's not always the smart way of medicine. I really think that we need to be asking the why a lot more as healthcare practitioners. So we're really passionate about what we do. We have a team of a number of naturopathic doctors, an osteopath, a holistic nutritionist, and an athletic therapist. And of course, we have our 2 office managers that keep us all in line. So we have a good time over there. One of my favorite profs going through med school used to always say this quote: "Life and death begins in the bowel." And at first, I thought he was being a little melodramatic, but really and truly, this is exactly what's going on. We can heal if our bowel is in the position to do so, and we can also start to become quite sick if things fall out of alignment pretty fast. And when I'm talking about the gut today, I'm talking about everything that starts from your mouth and goes all the way down to your rectum, and everything in between. Every part of your digestive tract has a function and a role, and we're going to start to get into that a little bit more here. So right off the bat, a couple of interesting stats about the gut. First of all, many of you seem to be quite aware of what leaky gut is, so you may already know these answers, but your small intestine is home to 70% of your immune system. This is a fact. And if we don't start treating our gut, and we want to start boosting our immune system for colds, flus, cancers, and all sorts of other immune issues, we're going to be behind the 8 ball pretty fast. The majority of your nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestine. And this is one that always baffles me. There's 10 times more microbial cells in your small bowel than there are collectively of your whole body's makeup of cells. If you think about that for a second, we're dealing with hundreds of trillions of cells. And if there's even a small misalignment with the microflora, which is the bacterial balance in your gut, this could have a tremendous impact as to what happens to how we look, how we feel, and how we fight and prevent chronic disease. And another interesting stat, if you actually unfolded all the tissue of your small bowel, stretched it out, and actually started to map it out all together, you could cover 10 football fields. Pretty powerful stuff. These are some health statistics that are current. This is what's going on today. Obesity has increased 60% in the last 2 decades alone. Of that, if you are diagnosed with some form of being obese, then we are 67% more likely to develop chronic disease. That includes cancer, heart disease, diabetes, multiple sclerosis. You go down the list. Type 2 diabetes. This wasn't around 100 years ago. Right now, it's skyrocketing. And type 2 diabetes is largely a lifestyle-based illness. There are some genetic components, but largely this is due to sedentary lifestyle and particular eating habits that actually start to knock down insulin receptors. Statin medications are the #1 prescribed drug in the history of mankind. Has heart disease had a tremendous improvement? So I'm going to break it to you guys. Statistically, it's very small, if any at all. Statin drugs are not curing heart disease by themselves. And I'll be very clear here, I'm not opposed to medications. I work very closely with medical doctors, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. But if we're treating the symptom, we're not getting to the root of the problem. And cholesterol is a reactionary process involved with heart disease. Autoimmune disease, 1 in 4 right now. And I'll get into this in a lot more detail. This is tremendously linked to leaky gut syndrome. And of course, one stat that is very alarming is 1 in 2 people in our lifetime will be diagnosed with some form of cancer. It was 1 in 3 years ago. It's 1 in 2 now. What's going on? Why are these stats, why are these alarming? 1 in 100 people were diagnosed with cancer in 1910. Why has this gone to 1 in 2? So one of the parts I enjoy in my clinic is when I try to explain to somebody that they have what is known as leaky gut syndrome. The looks on their faces, I wish I had a camera. No, doctor, this is not possible. I would know if that was leaking. Well, we're actually talking about the cells. We're not talking about a leaky rectum. So let's dive into it a little bit more here. This is a schematic of what are called your enterocytes, and I won't bore you with too much of the textbook stuff, but I want you to have a quick understanding of good, healthy gut cells, or enterocytes, which are the pink cells right in the center. And then you can see the different shade of more inflamed-looking cells on either side of those. Those are cells that are becoming inflamed, and you can see the junctions that are in the healthy pink cells. They're very tight. They're like tight bricks stacked against each other. But suddenly we start to see that they're spreading out, and we're seeing that these yellow squares and these black stars, which represent different types of bacteria and foods, partially digested foods rather, that are not supposed to be coming into the bloodstream. Suddenly this is starting to happen, and your body is not like this at all. The other way of looking at this is to envision this is the wall of your house. How would you guys be feeling this morning with that -11 temperature we had this morning? This wouldn't keep the cold out. This wouldn't keep the snow out. We may even have some unwanted critters running in and around in the summertime. This is a leaky gut. This is what it looks like. We've got to fix this. So just to give you some quick punchlines here, yes, much like the bricks that we just looked at, these are gaps that are not supposed to be that far apart, but suddenly these larger molecules that are supposed to be going down through your intestinal tract suddenly get into our bloodstream at a much earlier stage, and this creates a huge amount of inflammation. And this is a word that I'm going to talk to you guys a lot about today, because inflammation is behind illness. That's one thing I could have you guys leave today understanding, is that do whatever you can to bring inflammation down in your body. There is an enzyme called zonulin, and as zonulin increases, these gaps, these leaky gaps in our intestinal cells start to increase. And then what happens is when these molecules enter into our bloodstream, they form these complexes. And this is when your body starts to misidentify healthy tissue, good foods, and it starts to put a label on them as the bad guy. And then, of course, if we see a bad guy, your immune system wants to go out and wants to kill it. It wants to get rid of it. But what happens if suddenly it's identifying your favorite almonds, labeling them as an invader? What if it's labeling your skin as a problem, or your joints? Well, we start to get chronic skin rashes. We start to get chronic joint pain, like arthritis. But what happens if it gets into your immune system? We start to see that it becomes a lot more serious. And much like what these firemen are trying to do right now, this blaze is out of control. And this is something that, from an inflammatory standpoint, we never want this to get to this point. But when we are dealing with chronic conditions, we are dealing with chronic inflammation. And no matter how many fire hoses these firemen are going to put on this house, that house is coming down. We don't want our cells and ultimately our organs to degenerate. So what can we do? So I wanted to talk to you about the autoimmune connection. And I think many of you in here would be well aware of what types of autoimmune illnesses are. I'll go through a few in a moment. But once again, this is your body getting confused. And it's getting confused because of what's been sent into the bloodstream earlier and creating these complexes. And this is going to affect your immune system. It's going to affect your lymphatic system, which is basically like your sewer in your body. It's going to start to wash and clean all the debris out. But if that's congested, suddenly we can't have things start to clean out our lymphatics anymore. That's a problem. Our liver, this is responsible for managing blood sugar, managing cholesterol, keeping your hormones in check. This is what breaks down all of your toxins and sends them on the kidney to get removed. If your liver's not working well, how can we deal with all that stuff? And then, of course, we've got the endocrine, which is your hormone system. And this has a lot to do with your thyroid, your pancreas, your ovaries, your testes. And there are 140 different types of autoimmune diseases known right now. And almost all of these are connected in some form to what's going on in your intestine. And collectively, these are the third overall cause of sickness and mortality, next to heart disease and cancer. And unfortunately, the medications that we're currently trying to treat these autoimmune conditions, they're helpful to some degree, but they're not winning the war on this. We're not getting ahead of it. And they usually bring about a huge amount of side effects at the same time. I work a lot with autoimmune disease in my clinic, and we work very closely with medical doctors on these conditions, but the medications are not always going to establish a cure of this. And as I mentioned before, this is the inflammatory immune complex response that ensues that creates this autoimmunity. So if you remember those little cells I showed you with the little pink cells, I don't know if you saw, but there's these little fingerlings on the top of each cell, and these are called microvilli. It's almost like a shag carpet. And if these little microvilli, these little fingers, if they start to get chronically inflamed and eroded, our ability to absorb nutrients from our food is reduced. And it's not what you eat, but it's what you absorb. If we start to have a reduction in absorption, we're going to have a hard time pulling in those critical vitamins and minerals and amino acids that are necessary to heal damaged tissue. They're necessary to reduce that inflammatory response. Chronic nutrient deficiency equals chronic disease. And we'll get a bit more into this. So, what are some of the conditions linked to leaky gut? Well, we've got anxiety, attention deficit disorder, asthma, atherosclerosis, allergies, alopecia, arthritis, acid reflux, and acne. And that is just the A's, guys. IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, thyroid conditions. How many people know somebody with a hypothyroid? It is really common right now. Depression, migraines, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, heart disease, eczema and psoriasis, urticaria, which is chronic hives, chronic allergic reactions, fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's and colitis, sinusitis, chronic fatigue, and yes, even cancers. There's not a person in this room that doesn't know somebody who's suffered or suffering from one of the previous mentioned conditions. And one of the real exciting areas of medicine right now is an area called epigenetics. And this has been leading edge research in science in the last decade that's starting to put together the connection of how your genes interact with your environment, your thought patterns, and your diet. And they've been able to prove this in a number of laboratory studies that we may be given a set of genes that aren't in favor of X disease, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be predetermined to get that. And we're starting to realize that by using epigenetics as a map and as a tool, we can take control of our health a lot more than we were ever told before. So I'm going to walk you through how leaky gut can be quite serious and why we need to start to talk about this in our regular appointments with our family doctors and our naturopathic doctors and our chiropractors. We need to be talking about this every day. This is a picture of a healthy intestine. And as you can see in the middle there, the cross-section, there's all sorts of unwanted bugs there, such as the green spiky balls and the yellow stars. These represent undigested food particles. They represent toxins released from microbes, and they also represent specific microbes as well. The little blue ribbon is your body pulling in the good, healthy nutrients. Those little yellow and blue circles represent sugar molecules and they represent nutrients. And this, of course, if we can keep our gut healthy, we're going to start to see some healthy organs inside. This is actually a really a nice picture of what's going on with our liver, our cardiovascular system, and our pancreas. They look healthy, they look vibrant. But what happens if this happens? And what happens if this happens not just once a month or once a year, but what happens if this happens every day? It's amazing. When I travel for work and I'm in middle America in the airports, I think a few of your heads are nodding, we start to see some interesting things happening down there health-wise, just walking around the airport. It's not, and don't kid yourselves, it's here in Toronto, it's here in Canada too. But airports are notoriously interesting for me to start to watch and see what's going on with people's eating habits. All right, so if we start to use those every day, our gut has a different reaction. And much like the bricks in the wall, we start to see these gaps start to form in our intestine. And this does not keep the bad things out. Suddenly it's a free-for-all. Now what does that do to us? Well, this creates what's called lipotoxicity. And as you can see in this gentleman, he's got a much different picture than what the gentleman was a few slides ago. We're starting to see some adipose tissue happening all around the muscles, the liver, the pancreas, the heart, even the vascular system, and all out through the rest of the body. And what this does is this is what starts to create pathology. That doesn't look the same as the other guy's liver. This looks caramelized. This looks infused with fat. You heard of fatty liver? This is something that I'm seeing more and more in my clinic right now, that people under the age of 25 are showing markers of inflamed and fatty liver. And these people are not drinking a lot of alcohol. So what is causing this? This is something called NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepaturia. And this is caused, in large part, by the foods we are eating. And right now, there's 200 plus studies showing a link between gluten and fatty liver disease. This is emerging science that has not been talked about enough. All the other sugars that were in that previous diagram, all the trans fats, all the toxins, this is starting to really hurt the pancreas. This is why we're seeing so much diabetes. And this is why we're starting to see cardiovascular conditions. And we've got to talk about why treating this is more important than just taking a statin drug. So what causes leaky gut? Well, the number one cause is microbial imbalance. As I mentioned, we have 10 times more microbes in our gut than we have human cells in our whole body. So what's happening there if we start to take antibiotics on a regular basis? Again, there's a very important time and a place to take antibiotics. It's life-saving. But what if we're taking them just for a cold? And what if we're taking them regularly without taking a proper probiotic afterwards? Well, the antibiotics act like an A-bomb. They don't care what they kill whatever's in front of it. And it's much like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're going to take out all the good and healthy bacteria that compose 80% of your immune system. So if we take those out, we don't put them back in, suddenly yeast starts to take root in our body. And we don't have yeast, but what happens if yeast starts to become overgrown? Well, we start to see a lot more of those yellow stars and those green spiky balls in the previous diagrams. And these start to produce all sorts of what are called endotoxins, such as aldehyde, which is going to irritate the lining of your gut. And it's going to start to erode what's called the microfilm. Back to that little pink cell, those little fingerlings. And on top of that, they have a very small layer of mucus called the microfilm. And this is super important. But aldehyde and these other toxins that come from yeast are going to start to erode this layer. I do a large amount of stool analysis with my patients, not me personally, but the lab that we work with. And it's amazing how many people come back with parasites that they had no idea they had. And these parasites are great at taking away all the good nutrients in your body and also releasing toxins in your system. Poor diet. Hippocrates is the father of medicine. And he has said that let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Did that picture with all the junk food look like medicine to you guys? This is what we call a standard American diet or a SAD diet. And it's filled with refined sugars and preservatives and trans fats. High amounts of alcohol and caffeine and other chemicals are also going to be part of that. This is an area that's I'm going to touch on for a moment here. Food sensitivities are becoming a more and more of a chronic inflammatory trigger in my patients. There's a huge difference between an allergy and a sensitivity. A true allergy is diagnosed by your allergist with a skin prick test or even in some cases a blood test. And those reactions are caused by an antibody called an IgE immunoglobulin. And as you know, it happens fast. You eat that lobster tail and you have a shellfish allergy, you know within seconds. You feel that throat tightening up, in some cases you can't breathe, skin goes red, that happens immediately. But a food sensitivity is a delayed type of allergy. And this is caused by antibodies such as an IgA, IgM, and IgG type reaction. And all that means is that these are delayed. You could eat that lobster tail today, and you may not have a reaction for 3 weeks down the road. It won't be quite as immediate and dramatic, such as a type 1 reaction, but it can still cause inflammation. And if we're eating these foods that we have no idea because they don't happen right away, and suddenly we wake up and we've gained 3 pounds overnight and we've got this skin rash on our hand that wasn't there yesterday, and our joint, our knees hurting, we have a migraine, it's hard for us to figure out what foods we've eaten in the last week that may have been a trigger. And the most common sensitivities are dairy, eggs. You've heard me mention about gluten already. I could talk about gluten probably for about half of your day today, and I won't do that. But corn, beans, and some nuts. And so what we do is we try to help our patients, and we run a food sensitivity test on them. This is a blood test, and we're actually measuring all 3 antibodies here. And a good reaction would be, like we see in the fruit section, the majority of those fruits are in the very low section, 0. That is a food that is non-reactive. But as you can see, there's many others that are spiking. And many of us would agree that blueberries are good for us, but in this person, blueberries are one of the worst foods that they could be eating. They had no idea. They get told to eat blueberries by Dr. Oz. He says eat a cup every day. Well, that person's keeping them sick. And I touched on the medications, and I just want to go over these very quickly here. But NSAIDs are still one of the most commonly taken drugs every day right now. These are your Motrins, your Advil, your Lev, and previously Vioxx before it had its, before it was pulled. But what these do is these deplete your body of a key nutrient that keeps your gut cells stuck together or healed. And this is called N-acetylglucosamine. Antibiotics we've touched on already. Antacids. How many people suffer from GERD and reflux today? It's enormous. But guess what? It's not actually because you have too much acid. Most people actually don't have enough acid. It's just not in the right area. So we can get a lot of our patients off of these antacid medications that are depleting them of magnesium, zinc, and calcium. Talk about a cure for osteoporosis. Get off your medications. And steroids. Again, absolutely a time and a place for some of these. But if we use chronic use of these, we're going to deplete and we're going to thin the lining of our intestinal tract, which of course is going to lead to that inflammatory response we talked about earlier. And of course, last but not least, we've got chronic stress. And this is something that we all deal with every day. Whether it's work, home, traffic, Rob Ford, whatever we want to talk about. And there's a book out there called The Second Brain, and it's about your gut. We have more nervous tissue in our small bowel than we do in any other organ in our body except for our brain. So if we are stressed and we're nervous and we're anxious, our body doesn't want to digest and absorb. It thinks we're running from a tiger, from the way we've evolved. And it doesn't think about digesting when you're running from a tiger. It thinks about getting the blood to your arms, your legs, and your head so that you survive. And if we have these little stressors that happen every day and we don't de-stress properly and we don't start to support our stress glands, such as our adrenals, our gut takes a hit. So how do we find out if we've got leaky gut? Well, this is where functional medicine is an extremely powerful set of tools to help us. And it's my personal opinion that functional medicine is going to be the medicine of the future. You're going to hear about this a lot more going forward. And this is bridging what we call biochemical individuality. It's figuring out what does your body need. I may have 5 people in front of me that all have psoriasis, but it may be for 5 different reasons. And functional medicine is a set of tools that starts to allow us to pick off these biomarkers through testing, treatment, and proper analysis to figure out how we can cure. So a very simple leaky gut test is called the lactulose mannitol challenge. This is an easy to use urine test, and it's looking at figuring out small and large molecules and what's coming out the other end. If we see lots of lactulose come out, this person's intestine has been compromised. And then we begin a healing program to start to heal them. As I mentioned, stool analysis can be very helpful. We can start to identify some of the inflammatory enzymes such as lactoferrin, calprotectin, lysozyme. And we can start to identify not only the bad bacteria, but we can see, do we have enough good bacteria in there? Do we have too much yeast? Are there parasites that we've never even considered? All of which are starting to erode, create toxicity, and ultimately create chronic disease. And then I've showed you the food sensitivity panel. The rule of thumb, if we see more than 15 positive food reactions on this test, on a 100 food panel, that is an upregulated inflammatory immune response. And it can also give us some clues as to what's going on from a leaky gut. To start to heal somebody, we want to know what nutrients they are missing. And this is called a SpectraCell micronutrient panel. And this is a very specific type of a blood test that is not measuring your regular serum draw, that is great at looking at many other things. It's not great at looking at your nutrient levels because it is not measuring what's inside the red blood cell where those nutrients actually have an effect. So this is the difference of some of the testing. We've got to make sure when we're testing our vitamins and our mineral levels that we actually look inside the red blood cell. It's called a packed erythrocyte test. Okay. How do we heal? Well, we use what's called the 4R approach. Number one is to remove. Do we have foods that were reactive? You don't have to all do a food sensitivity test. Understand that 70% of people in this room are reactive to gluten in some form. It's a big number. It's the other foods that become quite tough to figure out. That's when it becomes quite valuable to understand, and that's where a test can be valuable. We want to remove the yeast, the parasites, the bacteria. The stool test that we run not only tests what levels of these microbes are at, it also tells us which agent is going to be the best one to kill it. How many people go on these parasite cleanses because they've read it in the paper or they've seen it on TV and they're not getting better? Well, they may be taking something that their body's resistant to. And it's just rolling the dice and seeing what works. When we test, we don't guess. And just a quick side note, most of my patients have 5 to 7 pounds of unhealthy or unwanted bacteria and microbes in their gut. Many of them are quite happy once we start to get rid of these because they suddenly forget about their joint pain. They could drop down 5 or 2 belt loops on their pants. That's more important to them for some of my patients. Toxic burden and stress. The next R is we want to replace. We want to put these enzymes back into our body that can help soothe inflammation, can digest our food better, like lipase and amylase. We want to bring in hydrochloric acid. Do you know anyone who's dealing with GERD or reflux or heartburn? Almost all of these people can get better without their medications if they start to identify if they have a hydrochloric acid deficiency. And you go about treating that, you get people off meds pretty fast. And of course, replace the nutrients as they need. We want to re-inoculate, put in the good guys. If we're taking antibiotics, make sure that you go on a high-quality probiotic. And I stress the word high quality. There was a major newspaper in Canada about 8 months ago that did an expose on probiotic supplements. And what they found was that 80% of the companies that they tested I think 20 companies, 80% were shown to not have what was in the pill that they put on the label. And some of them, it was absolutely nothing that they put on the label. And what they were doing is they were testing supplement companies that are not what we call a professional level or a pharmaceutical grade. And this is something that I stress with all my patients, really emphasize with you. If you're going to invest into a supplement, make sure that it has got neutral third-party testing done on the quality of their products. All you have to do is ask. Ask them to provide that for you. There's about 8 excellent companies in North America that do this. AOR, Thorne, Metagenics, Vitazan, Genestra. There's a few more. But the other error that happens with bacteria, when people taking probiotics, they're like, oh, well, I had my tablespoon of yogurt today. I'm fine. We're talking about billions and billions of doses of these individual units here. My minimum dosing for somebody with leaky gut is 100 billion a day. You can get that in one capsule. But most probiotic supplement companies are between 5 and 10. These are the ones that aren't even shown to have them in there. They're not even proven. You're not going to put a house fire out with a water gun. And we also want to talk about prebiotics. Prebiotics are the food that actually feed, the fuel that feeds the healthy bacteria. This is fiber, these are fructooligosaccharides, this is inulin. These are things that we get from a lot of our fruit and vegetables. And of course we want to repair. Glutamine is one of my favorites. Glutamine heals, it glues, it actually binds those enterocytes, those leaky gut cells back together again. N-acetylglucosamine does the same thing. All of our Advils are taking these away from us. EFAs, these are your omega-3s. These are a very powerful anti-inflammatory supplement. A lot of us are deficient in omega-3s, or we have too many omega-6s that creates this imbalance, which creates an inflammatory response. We get omega-6s from all of our vegetable oils that are in our processed foods. We get these in a lot of restaurant foods. Then we have DGL, which stands for deglycerized licorice. This is a very soothing substance that actually will coat and line an irritated section of your intestinal tract so that your body can start to heal. Same with aloe. And the other part of healing your gut is healing your liver. Okay, there's a number of wonderful nutrients that are going to start to help you heal the liver. One of my favorites is milk thistle, N-acetylcysteine. I didn't put it up here, but glutathione is fantastic. And the way that we start to get these in under one roof very quickly are through what are called medical foods. Of course, we want to be eating a large amount of fruits and vegetables, but most of us aren't getting the 12 to 15 servings a day that we require. So we need some additional support. We need to make sure that we're supplementing appropriately. It's not the more the better. Figure out what you need and supplement accordingly. And I always caution people with detoxes. I'm a big fan of detoxifying, of detoxification, but you want to make sure that you are not just lunging at the latest trend that's out there. You're not just jumping at a one-size-fits-all program, because this can be dangerous. I've heard of people being sent to the emergency room because they dislodged a gallstone too quickly and they've blocked their bile duct, and that's a trip to the ER room. Why don't we do a little bit of analysis to figure out, okay, wait, that gallbladder is inflamed. We better do some support there and break down some of those stones so that they can clear out easier before we start to quickly and rush into a detox program. And as I mentioned before, there's over 200 studies citing that gluten creates what we call fatty liver disease. If we can start paying attention a bit more to what we put on our plate, we can start to heal. So as I mentioned, a few of the nutrients. Here's a few more other ones. Please don't rush out and buy a million bottles of these things. That is not, in my opinion, a great way to heal people. You want to bring these nutrients in through food and nutrition, and if they need help otherwise, then we start to look at medical foods for support. Medical foods are using natural powders, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but this is what a medical food would look like. This is one of my favorites. This is using a hypoallergenic protein and bringing in all the other nutrients to mix with it. So all you gotta do in the morning is mix it in your water and away you go. If anyone says to me that they don't have time to eat in the morning, this is your recipe right here. All it is taking a scoop, putting it in water, and drinking it, or taking it with you to work. And most importantly, this is powerful medicine. This is what starts to drive those nutrients into your body to heal. And this specific medical food, there's a number of different companies that do them. This one is designed specifically for leaky gut. In some of my more advanced cases of people with chronic disease, we have to actually bypass the gut temporarily because their gut is so broken, we've got to build it from the inside out. These are people with colitis and Crohn's, cancer, multiple sclerosis. And we will actually infuse nutrients through IV therapy to help accelerate the healing from the inside out while we're working on their dietary regime. Because again, if they can't absorb, it's going to be tough for them to start to absorb everything from their food and from their nutrients at the very beginning. But eventually they will be able to. And that's when it gets really exciting and powerful. Glutamine, well, again, like my brief explanation earlier, is it's the quality of products, guys. If you're going to invest your money into getting well, make sure that you trust the products and the tools that you're using. And so ask your companies, if you're buying supplements that are a bit more on the cheaper side, start to ask them, can you provide a neutral third-party analysis of the quality of your product and how much research do you guys put into your products? And by the way, where's the sourcing of your nutrients coming from? Just beware. We don't want to end up like this, okay? We don't want to be just doing Band-Aid solutions. We want to treat the root cause. And if we do that, we can start plugging the gaps pretty quickly on leaky gut. We can facilitate a healing response much faster than we would be otherwise. And that way we don't wait till the horse is out of the barn. We don't wait till the wheel falls off the cart. We start to prevent and reverse these conditions well before they manifest. And I'll end on this quote. This is by Thomas Edison. The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of human frame and in the cause and prevention of disease. So thanks, everyone. Just to let you know before I go, I'll be happy to answer a lot of questions. I'll be up at the Smith's Pharmacy booth later on, but I also send out a large amount of research, a large amount of information, not only daily on my Twitter feed, but over my blog and my free newsletter, so feel free to follow us on that. But I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have right now. Does anybody have any burning questions? So right there.
Have you ever heard about gluten in beans before? Is there a better bean and a worse bean?
Well, gluten is found in more foods than you would actually be aware of. It's actually everywhere. It's not in every bean, but we're seeing what's called molecular mimicry starting to happen, where we get these molecules that start to act like a gluten will act. This is actually very common in corn as well. So I would say don't be too alarmed about every bean. Pay attention to the foods that do have a lot of issues, such as all grains, and corn is a grain as well. Those are the ones, even the gluten-free products right now, these are still making people feel sick because they may not have that gluten protein, but they're filled with corn, they're filled with sugar, and these are things that actually activate that gluten receptor and or the gluten, the same cascade of events that gluten would do. So be very careful with that. Beans are not the worst culprit, though.
What's the best thing to kill parasites in your stomach? Parasites? What's the best thing to kill them?
The question was, what's the best secret to kill parasites in your stomach? You've got to figure out, first of all, which parasite you're dealing with. There are thousands. When we run a parasite panel with somebody, if they have a certain parasite, we also figure out, okay, what's going to kill that parasite? Because you'll be surprised at how many of these parasite cleanses don't work because the parasite is resistant to them. Fortunately, it's not an easy answer to reply to you. There are a number, you'll hear of black walnut a lot, but you've got to figure out, if you're not getting well on your parasite cleanse, it may be worth you to do a stool test to figure out exactly what's going to kill that specific strain of parasite. Which parasite have you been diagnosed with?
Well, that's for this. So far I haven't. I just talked to a naturopathic and he said I should come into his clinic for the pay my fee, but so far I haven't. He said I have parasite, but I don't know exactly what.
So my question right off the bat is, how does he know you have parasites? There's only one way to know, and that's to run a comprehensive diagnostic stool analysis. That is the gold standard on the planet. Anybody that's telling you otherwise, that just by looking at you, well, that's guessing. You've got to stop, I think a lot of us in this room got to stop guessing. We've got to start getting the real answers. So it's not a bad idea. You may hit a home run. But if you're not getting better, you're going to end up trying to figure out the root cause at some point. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. Hi. Oh, sorry. Yes? The question was, what is my favorite probiotic? Well, it's a bit of an extension of the last answer, is to figure out what's going on with my patient before I prescribe it. For example, if I have somebody with chronic diarrhea, chances are I'll prescribe them something called Saccharomyces proboulardii. But if I see somebody that's just got some core signs and symptoms of leaky gut, I'm going to give them something called Probiomax or Ultraflora Plus. And these are products that, again, are very high quality probiotics that are pharmaceutical grade, and they're at high doses. I would give between 100 to 500 billion of these a day.
Aside from your own brand of products Is there any other brand you recommend?
Well, first of all, that's not my brand. I have no affiliation with them.
Oh, okay.
This is just a brand that I use. I use about 10 different companies in my clinic. So, and I listed those earlier. AOR, Vitazan, Thorne, Metagenics is one of them. Zymogen. These are exceptional level companies. Hi, right there. Yes.
Yes, I want
I've had food testing.
someone told me that you
sorry.
get parasites in your blood because there's undigested proteins in your blood because you don't have the right digestion. And then that increases the acid level in your blood. Then you need more minerals. Now, is that right or?
Yeah, in a nutshell, that's very good. Her statement, if you didn't hear it, was she's heard that she may have been diagnosed with parasites in her blood, which ultimately leads to what we call acidosis, or high levels of acidity. Well, exactly, if you follow what we were just doing, all that creates inflammation, which is generally aggravated or caused by high levels of acidity. And if you want to bring the fire down, much like that house on fire, you start to do the opposite. You alkalinize your body with minerals, with other nutrients that are alkalizing. Green leafy vegetables are a wonderful way to bring those down. Yes, sir.
Austin, just got a copy of your presentation.
Unfortunately, some of the materials are copyrighted. I'd be happy if there's a certain slide, take a photo of it, but you can follow up with me directly and I can send you certain slides that you're interested in. Absolutely. Yes, right there.
What do you think of eating fermented food?
The question is, what do I think of fermented food? I think that they're excellent,
Yeah,
as long as you don't have a sensitivity to it. Okay, fermented foods are wonderful sources of probiotics and prebiotics. And there's some great different soys that are fermented, like natto, kimchi, all right, kefir, the dairy. It can be made from coconut as well if you have dairy sensitivity.
So do they heal the syndrome?
I'm sorry?
Do they heal?
Do they heal? Yes, they can be a very powerful tool. But once again, if you're talking about what we call therapeutic doses or high-level doses, fermented foods, you would have to eat a garbage bag full of them a day to actually have the same impact as some of the other therapies. So they're good things to do daily, but sometimes you need a little bit more. Come over here. Right, yes. So the question is, she's heard that you can't cure leaky gut and candida until you cure mercury levels. And this is a very, very good point. We do a large number of mercury analysis and other toxic mineral analyses in our clinic. And there's a connection. If you have elevated mercury from the fillings in your teeth, from the foods that you're eating like tuna, from the vaccines you've been getting, that this is going to allow yeast such as candida to stick around much longer. It's very true. And so what we'll do is we'll actually chelate our patients. We'll find out what levels they have, and we'll actually take those metals out first before we embark on a healing program. Very good question. Yes?
Are there any good grains that we can eat?
Good grains. Okay, so this is interesting. You just open up a can of worms. If you are inflamed, all grains cause inflammation. Full stop. All grains are not all gluten. It's all grains, period. So eating gluten-free will still be pro-inflammatory too. One of the world experts on this is Dr. Peter Osborne, who I flew down to Houston this summer to see speak. And he's very strict with his diet. He doesn't allow a single grain, not even white rice or brown rice into their diet. Now, that's not to say that we can't have some balance once we're healthy and healed. And many of my patients, they go back and they're able to tolerate the odd grain here or there. But when you're trying to heal at the beginning, it's like trying to push a giant rock up a hill. You stop for a second and cheat on one meal, that rock's going to slide further back from where it was. So all grains spike insulin levels in your body, and insulin is a pro-inflammatory hormone. Gluten-free or not? Good question. Yes. Quinoa is included, but quinoa is the least damaging culprit because quinoa is a pseudo grain. I eat quinoa a lot. I think it's great. But again, once you get to that point where you've got your inflammation under control, you can eat these foods. But some people, I've had some people where quinoa, I should tell you a quick story, quinoa can still be aggravating. We had a case presented this summer, and this was of a nun. And she had very serious illness, all sorts of autoimmune reactions. And she came in and she did a whole pile of tests. She was sticking to her diet perfectly, avoided everything, got rid of her yeast, got her nutrient levels up. She was still very sick. And the presenter this summer, this colleague of mine, said, wait a second, you go to communion every day, right? Of course I do. It was that little wafer that she was having every day that was keeping her sick. That small amount can keep people sick. This is an extreme case, but that's just to answer your question. Yes?
I react to L-glutamine. What alternative do I have?
You react to L-glutamine? Have you tried N-acetylglucosamine?
Okay.
Have you also tried infusing glutamine? Some people can't tolerate it orally, that's why we start to infuse it. You may be so hypersensitive that things that are generally quite healthy and quite hypoallergenic may be reactive for you. You may want to consider IV therapy. Hi. Yeah, it's the lactulose mannitol challenge we went over. Yeah, it's that urine test. That's the gold standard. Yeah. Way at the back, black shirt. GMOs, I would talk to you for about 24 hours if I open that can of worms. But yes, they don't cause leaky gut directly. They create inflammation full stop in your body. Yes? Yes?
If, with all the talks that we've watched and listened to this weekend, with Sprint Q, you seem to know quite a bit about it, and I know for a fact that I personally have improved and a family member has improved from your approach. Why is it that the health system doesn't back this?
I think that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if everyone heard that, but it's a bit of a loaded question. It was why does our traditional healthcare system back this type of approach? Well, I was going to be a medical doctor, and I have very close friends and family members who are, and I continue to work with them. But I decided not to be because they weren't answering the questions I was asking. Now, why isn't this happening? I think a lot of it has to do with money. And I'll just leave it at that. Unfortunately, that's a pretty charged question, but it's an excellent question to ask. I think what we can do about this, most importantly, is to keep asking our medical doctors. This is why I did a fellowship for 2 years after medical school with medical doctors, because all of us were very driven about the why, not the Band-Aid solution anymore. Guys, I guess I'm being cut off here, but if you have more questions, I'll be happy to stick around here, and I'll also be up at the Smith Pharmacy.